Let me start with something uncomfortable. Most of you listening to this are not lazy. You're not stupid. You're not unlucky. But many of you are quietly making a mistake that destroys entire decades, and you don't even realize it yet. The mistake is simple. You believe time is neutral. You think waiting doesn't cost anything. I believed that once too. At 25, I thought I had plenty of time. At 35, I thought I was still young. At 45, I thought I could fix it later. And then one day I was 60, not because time rushed, but because I kept postponing decisions that scared me. Here's the brutal truth no one tells you. Time doesn't punish you for doing the wrong thing. It punishes you for doing nothing. I've watched people wait to leave the wrong career, end the wrong relationship, start the thing they knew they should, not because they were incapable, but because waiting felt safer than changing. Waiting feels responsible. Waiting feels mature. Waiting feels like control. But waiting is the most expensive decision you can make. Because time doesn't pause while you figure things out. It quietly locks doors. Careers become harder to change. Bodies take longer to recover. Energy disappears. Confidence erodes. And the scariest part? From the inside, it feels like nothing is happening. From the outside, years are disappearing. If this is already making you uncomfortable, good. That means you're listening honestly. Before we go further, subscribe to Helen Restart, not for motivation, not for comfort, but for the kind of truth that helps you wake up before life does it for you. In the next part, I'll explain why smart people delay the most and how that delay quietly becomes a trap they don't escape. What makes this so dangerous is that the people who wait the longest are usually the smartest ones. They analyze, they plan, they prepare, they collect information. They confuse thinking with progress. I've seen this pattern repeat for decades. The intelligent ones don't jump into bad decisions, but they also don't jump into good ones. They wait for clarity. They wait for confidence. They wait to feel ready. And readiness never arrives. Because readiness isn't a feeling. It's something that appears after movement, not before it. What actually happens is quieter. You stay in a job that slowly numbs you because it pays well enough. You stay in a relationship that drains you because it isn't that bad. You delay starting something meaningful because you don't want to look foolish. So you compromise just a little, then a little more. And one day your life doesn't look wrong, it just doesn't feel like yours anymore. This is how decades disappear. Not through dramatic failure, through comfort that slowly becomes confinement. You tell yourself, I'll change when things slow down. I'll decide after this year. I just need more stability. But stability becomes a cage when you never leave it. Here's the truth most people discover too late. The cost of change is paid up front. The cost of waiting is paid with interest. You don't feel it in your 20s. You start noticing it in your 30s. You feel it deeply in your 40s. And by 60, you can trace every regret back to the same habit, choosing safety over honesty. This isn't about being reckless. It's about being awake. If something in your life has felt wrong for a long time, that's not confusion. That's clarity you've been negotiating with. There's another reason people stay stuck, and it's harder to admit. Your identity becomes attached to what you've already invested. You don't just have a job, you have history there. You don't just have a relationship, you have years inside it. You don't just have a lifestyle, you have proof that you made it this far. So changing doesn't feel like growth, it feels like erasing yourself. This is where most people lose honesty. They say they're being practical, they say they're being responsible. What they're really doing is protecting their past from being questioned. Because if you admit you chose wrong back then, you have to accept that you stayed too long, and that's painful. So instead, you explain it away. You call dissatisfaction gratitude. You call exhaustion adulthood. You call numbness normal. I've seen people defend lives that are quietly killing them, not loudly, not dramatically, slowly. And here's the cruel part. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. Not because you can't, but because your confidence erodes. You stop trusting your judgment. You tell yourself, if I were really capable, I'd already be somewhere else. That's not true. You're not incapable, you're over-conditioned. Conditioned to endure instead of choose. This is how people end up resenting younger versions of themselves. Not because they failed, but because they didn't listen when the discomfort first appeared. Discomfort is not the enemy, it's information. And when you ignore information long enough, life stops whispering, it starts forcing. That's when people call it a midlife crisis, but it isn't a crisis, it's delayed honesty. When life finally forces a change, people say it came out of nowhere. It didn't. It was building quietly for years. Burnout doesn't arrive suddenly. Resentment doesn't appear overnight. Regret doesn't fall from the sky. They grow when you ignore the small inner signals that tell you something is off. Most people don't break because they tried and failed. They break because they endured too long. They normalized exhaustion. They normalized emptiness. They normalized pretending to be fine. And here's what no one warns you about. The longer you ignore yourself, the harder it becomes to recognize who you are. You start making decisions based on damage control instead of desire. You choose what hurts less instead of what matters more. By then, the question is no longer, what do I want? It becomes, what can I tolerate? That's the moment a life quietly shrinks. Not because opportunity disappeared, but because courage was postponed until it was expensive. I've sat with people in their 50s and 60s who said the same sentence in different ways. I knew, I just didn't act. That sentence carries more weight than failure ever could. Failure teaches. Waiting erodes. You don't need a perfect plan to change direction. You need honesty and movement, nothing more. Momentum restores clarity. Stillness breeds doubt. This isn't about making a dramatic leap. It's about refusing to stay unconscious. They think there will be a trick, a system, a shortcut. There isn't. The truth is simpler and harder. The moment you stop lying to yourself, your life changes direction. Not instantly, not comfortably, but irreversibly. You don't need to burn your life down. You don't need permission. You don't need certainty. You need one honest decision that interrupts the pattern. One conversation you've been avoiding. One step away from what's draining you. One commitment to stop waiting for a version of yourself that never arrives. People think regret comes from choosing wrong. It doesn't. Regret comes from knowing you were aware and still chose comfort. By 60, the people who are at peace are not the ones who succeeded the most. They're the ones who listened early. They changed before life cornered them. They moved while movement was still affordable. If you're in your 20s, time is on your side, but it is not patient. If you're in your 30s, clarity matters more than speed. If you're in your 40s, honesty is non-negotiable. And if you're listening to this and feel exposed, unsettled, or quiet inside, that's not fear. That's recognition. This channel exists to remind you of what you already know but keep postponing. You don't need a new life. You need a braver relationship with the one you're already living. This is Helen, and I restarted my life.